This is going to be quick. I'm just saying hello from Glen Hilton. Jeff Jackson's here for Carolina, doing his 100 counties in 100 days, I think it is. Something like that. It's a decent turnout. People are having to park in the overflow parking. Looks like it's about to be started soon. We'll see. I think they're waiting for stragglers. Not the ideal weather, but it is what it is. At least it's not raining right now. See y'all later.
And two, you get a phone call from every political consultant in the country because they all want a job. Because this is North Carolina, and we're a big old battleground state. Yes. Right? Yes. You got 3 states we got a real good chance of flipping in this midterm. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. That's the first time that's worked. Unbelievable, Hickory. So I got all these phone calls from all these consultants. They all pitch me on what they think I need to do to win. And I got a million of these pitches. And I can boil them down for you because they were all basically the same. They said, Jeff, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a focus group. We're going to do some polling. And then we're going to give you 5 key phrases to repeat on an endless loop for the next year and a half, and that's how you win. And I said, yeah, bullshit, that's how you lose. You're not going to do, we're going to take the opposite approach. But y'all, look, you got to understand. A lot of candidates take that advice because this is a scary thing. Stepping out onto a statewide stage, battleground state, is scary. And what you get with 5 key phrases, you get control. Candidates want control. But what you lose is authenticity. You lose this. This doesn't happen if all you're doing is repeating 5 phrases over and over again. You have been asked to accept so much less from your candidates, less transparency, less energy, less substance, every single election. We want to reverse all of that. You deserve so much better than you've gotten from your U.S. senators. We want to raise your expectations. 2 big ways we're doing that now. 1, we're holding town halls again. Yes. I know this seems like a normal, classic piece of American politics. Folks, at the level of a U.S. Senate race, this is extinct. Yeah. This doesn't exist. Why? Because of video. Because I say one thing, or I trip down these stairs, which I could very well do. One of you gets it, she's right there, she's on me. That goes, she gets a nice caption, watch this candidate fall downstairs. That goes viral online, and that's the whole campaign. I'll give you an example. We have a very nice gentleman here. He's with the Republican Party. It's his job to follow me everywhere I go and record everything I say. And every night he sends it up to headquarters. They look for a 10 or 15 second clip and attack me with it online. And that's fine. That's the price that we pay to give you direct access to someone who wants to make law in your name. That's fine. We should have a candidate confident enough in themselves to be willing to be videotaped answering your questions in public. Yes. That's actually really important for winning a hard election. Yes. So that's 1, holding town halls. 2, we're making this a true 100 county campaign. Now, can you win by focusing on a handful of states? Yes, you can, but it's not the right thing to do. We want to treat this campaign not just as a gigantic marketing effort, but as actual preparation for the job. So that if one of you just knew that you were going to be our next U.S. Senator, no election, just your term, 2 years from now, what would you do between now and then to prepare? If all you wanted to do was a good job, I think it would look like this. Yeah. I think you'd go to Pasquotank, you'd go to Cherokee, you'd start with some humility. You don't know everything that's going on. This is a big state. I ran into the governor the other day. He came over and he shook my hand. He said, "It's a big damn state, ain't it, Jeff?" I said, "I had no idea. I wish you had told me, sir." We have learned so much. We're doing 100 town halls in 100 days. Not because I'm trying to tell you that we're going to do things differently, but because I'm trying to show you. Because you've heard it said too many times by too many candidates that this is going to be different. And your inclination is to say, yeah, probably not. But 100 town halls in 100 days, every county in the state, folks, that is a new level of transparency and energy. That's why we're doing this as a down payment on the type of representative I think you deserve. So look, I want to tell you a little bit about where we've been and what we've learned. And then we're going to talk about anything that you want to talk about. We went to Yadkin County. Yadkin had a hospital. 5 years ago, their hospital closed. We went to the site of that closed hospital. We talked to a doctor who had worked there. We got a sense of what it means in a community when a hospital closes. And a big piece of this conversation is going to be about Medicaid expansion, right? We've got 19 or 20 rural hospitals on the brink. Biggest reason is because of this massive unforced error of not having taken back our own federal tax money and used it to expand health insurance to 600,000 people, create 80,000 jobs, bring billions of dollars into our economy. Hospitals would pay 10%. Federal government would pay 90%. So what's the bill to the state taxpayer? Nothing. Zero. And they all said no. Even though in the General Assembly, both parties overwhelmingly agree it's the right thing to do in private, behind closed doors. It's almost unanimously popular. So why hasn't it happened? Because it came out of Obamacare. And they're worried about what happens in their primaries. They're worried about the mail that would run in their primaries that has their face next to Obama's face. And they're toast. That's literally the reason why. We just got drugged through a pandemic without having done the obvious thing you could do to care for people, which is to accept our own federal tax money back, use it to expand Medicaid. We have the second largest rural population of any state in the country. Wow. Texas is 1. We're 2. The unforced error of not expanding Medicaid hits us harder for that reason. These hospitals that are on the brink, you know where they are. That was Yadkin. Then we went to Cherokee. Can't go any further west than Cherokee. They tell you that all the time when you're in Cherokee. Their favorite tidbit, they say, Jeff, did you know that you are now closer to 6 state capitals than you are to Raleigh? And the first time somebody told me that, I said, no kidding. And then times 2 through 20, I said, yes, ma'am, I've heard that. We spoke to a teacher. By the way, where are my teachers? Thank you. This part of the speech is about you. Cherokee County spoke to a teacher. He said, Jeff, there are 25 teachers at my school. This summer, we're losing 9 of them. Wow. To Tennessee, to Georgia. I'm in Mecklenburg. We lose teachers to South Carolina. If you know anything about the history of our states, you know that's deeply strange. Yes. That hasn't been who we are. We've been able to recruit teachers away from other states, and now it's happening to us. Why? Because teachers make less now than they did 10 years ago, adjusted for inflation. Well, think about it. teachers haven't even kept up with inflation. I get a little emotional. And inflation has been low, and it hasn't even kept up. Master's pay, gone. Good retirement benefits for new hires on the way out. Folks, you're going to see a huge budget fight happening right now in Raleigh. We have a record surplus. We have never had a bigger surplus for our state than we have right now. We could give teachers a 10% raise and have money left over. That's what we should do. They passed a Senate budget that instead of doing that, it takes the corporate rate, which is already the lowest of any state that has one, at 2.5%. They take it to 0. We voted against it. It passed the Senate. The governor's going to veto it. That veto will be sustained, and then we're going to get to work on a real budget for all of you and for the state. Broadband comes up everywhere.
Yes.
Particularly out in the West, but comes up everywhere. We're going to make it a major priority because you all have asked us to make it a major priority. You're going to see our campaign roll out a very comprehensive plan to build out broadband. Why? Because it's not a luxury. Yes. It's a necessity. You read the stories of those kids being driven into the parking lots of McDonald's so that they could do their homework. No clearer sign that this is no longer a luxury and is now a necessity. We went to New Hanover. New Hanover, that's on the coast. That's Wilmington. First issue they raised was water quality in the Cape Fear River. Then we went to Chatham. Chatham County, 150 miles away from New Hanover. First issue they raised, water quality on the Cape Fear River. Cape Fear starts in Chatham, goes 150 miles to the sea. And I like to use that as sort of a visual reminder. 17 states have decided to take a regulatory approach instead of a criminal approach, and the sky has fallen in none of them. Crime has gone up in none of them. Hard drug use has gone up in none of them. I'll ask you, what has gone up in all of them? Tax revenue. Tax revenue was the answer. 90% of you got it. I'd like you to give it a hand to my staffer who's bringing me a microphone. We're not in business? Are we in business now? We're very close. There we are! They gave me a call last night. They said, Jeff, we got more RSVPs than we were expecting. You need to take the microphone into your house and charge it up. I said, done. Happy to charge it. They didn't tell me that when we left, I should bring it back in the car. We got halfway here, and I started hoping for a smaller crowd. And I showed up, I'm like, oh, this is terrible, look at all these people. But we decided to give it a go. Now we're going to put a little oomph into this, right? What were we talking about? Cannabis. All right, let me finish my thought, because here's the situation in North Carolina. We criminally charge 30,000 people a year for an amount of cannabis that weighs less than 6 pennies in your hand. Those are lives that we are permanently derailing. And can we have a real conversation about racial equity without talking about this? No. If you're black, you are almost 4 times as likely to be criminally charged. Black people and white people use marijuana the exact same rate. We should expunge those records and let people move on with their lives. Climate change comes up everywhere. Everywhere. And for those of you who are tired of hearing about it, get ready. It's going to be a part of every presidential debate for the rest of our lives. At this point, it's simply a question of how well we respond to this challenge that's going to be with us for the rest of our lives. You know what I've learned? The corruption will continue. We have 4 months. We have 4 months to end gerrymandering, or we catch it for another decade. Are they going to end it in our state legislature with these majorities? No. Has to be ended on a federal level. I have no idea what Joe Manchin is thinking, that he thinks it's worse to have a partisan bill that allows you to actually be in control of your outcomes than it is to just step aside and throw the keys to Mitch McConnell and say, you get to decide whether or not elections will be rigged all across the country. And folks, you can send as many angry emails to Joe Manchin as you want, or you can just elect me and we're good here. And the filibuster, using it to block civil rights legislation and voting rights legislation, that is literally Jim Crow behavior. I would never stand for it as your U.S. Senator. All right, so I gave the same list, plus or minus, in Haywood County. And a woman came up to me and she said, hey, Jeff, that was a great list. One problem. None of it's going to mean anything when the misinformation hits your campaign. What are you going to do about that? Misinformation being one of the defining features of our political landscape. That's the right question. And before I take yours, I want to answer hers because I didn't give her a great answer, but I've been working on it. Here's what I think. You don't combat misinformation by waving around a fact check. You do it with a human touch. You do it by giving people a sense of who you are as a person long before the misinformation hits, so that when it does, when they run the ads that say whatever crazy thing they're going to say, folks will say, actually, Jeff's been to my county a couple times, and that doesn't sound like him. And that's what it sounds like to beat misinformation. It doesn't sound like, here are 15 reasons why you're wrong. It sounds like giving people a sense of who you are as a person. If we get to the end of this, and people think that I came in a box that says political candidate written on it, we're toast. You have to give people a more warts and all approach, a transparent approach. That's why we're doing this. That's why this is the first of several visits to every county in the state. Be local everywhere is how you win a midterm in North Carolina. Because at the end of the day, this is just a job application. And all of you get to decide whether or not to hire me. But you need to know, this ain't the first job I've ever had. First job I had was delivering flyers for a pizza company, trying not to get bit by dogs. Trying to save up for a car, but I couldn't save enough, so I couldn't get the car. But my dad crashed his car, but didn't total it, so that became my car. I used that car to get my first real job, which was Blockbuster Video. Anybody here never been to a Blockbuster? Looking for Generation Z. And then I worked at a barbecue restaurant. And then I bussed tables at Outback Steakhouse. And then I was in Afghanistan with the Army. And then I came home and I did law school on the GI Bill. God bless the GI Bill, by the way. I wouldn't own a home. I wouldn't own a home if it weren't for the GI Bill. And then I became a prosecutor. Why? Because I watched a ton of episodes of Law and Order in college. I thought Jack McCoy was the man. And so I did that job for several years, was going to stay. And then I was cleaning up court one day, and this defense attorney comes up and says, Jeff, did you hear the news? I said, no, what happened? He said, the mayor of Charlotte was just arrested by the FBI. I said, that's amazing. And I just went on about my day. Mayor stepped down the next day. He was replaced by my state senator. And then I got picked to replace that guy pretty much clear out of the blue. I was 31. I'd never run for office. I didn't know anyone who would ever run for office. I was about half the average age of the state senate. Last time I had been there was on the 3rd grade field trip. All I could remember is got a really red carpet. And it does. If you've been there, it's the reddest carpet you've ever seen. That was 7 years ago. My wife and I had 1 kid at that point, and now we have 3. And I've got 3 jobs, and it works out to be roughly 1 job per kid. And my wife works full time. And we got 2 car payments, and we got a mortgage. And I'm not here telling you that there's any such thing as a regular American family, because there's not. But I do think it'd be a great thing if our U.S. Senate had more people with 3 kids, 2 car payments, and a mortgage. I think that's a dose of reality that place could really use. Our little one, that's our girl, that's Avery, she's 2. And because we're on the road doing this 100 county thing, I only get to be home roughly 1 night per week. It means I'm watching her grow up in time lapse right now. And it's amazing how much changes in 6 days. I mean, her face is different, her vocabulary is bigger, it's amazing. And the only way I can justify my absence to her is if I run this thing the right way and for the right reasons. To me, that's town halls everywhere, a true 100 county campaign. That's the kind of campaign that'll make you proud to be from North Carolina, and that'll make Avery proud of me. And that's why I'm running, and that's how I'm running. And now we're going to get to the more important part, which is what all you have to say. I want to hear about anything that's happening here locally. Doesn't have to be a question, you can just tell me. We had a guy stand up in Macon, and his whole thing was, he said, "Senator, we have the best greenway in the state." And then he sat down. And now I know that about Macon. He got it in there. Happy to take any questions about what's going on in Raleigh State Senate, because I'm still there, and obviously happy to talk U.S. Senate stuff. The floor is yours. Go right ahead. Looking around. Try to be up, please.
You mentioned climate change. That's my #1 issue. What sort of agenda would you have if you were a U.S. Senator for climate change, and what would you try to get done?
Okay, the question was about climate change, more specifically about the agenda. Thank you for that question. All right, here's what we need to do. I don't think the barrier in addressing climate is technological. I think it's political. A lot of this is about misinformation. I don't want to give you a set of 5 vague principles. I want to be as specific as possible and as local as possible, because things get less scary when you show people exactly how things are going to impact their lives. This is a win-win, especially in the northeastern part of the state, which might have some of the nation's best capacity for utility scale solar. So we have some specific advantages as a state. Solar, we may have the nation's best offshore wind capacity. Onshore wind is good, we've barely tapped that. Hydro is something we have barely tapped. There are some states that get most of their energy from hydro. Look at this person fist bumping in the back. A hydro fan. And we get something like 0.4% of our electricity from hydro. And now we've got some challenges that are specific to our state too. We got a 320-mile long coast. That's a big challenge. Go to New Hanover and ask them about it. They'll tell you. And then we've got 7 coal plants. That's what we've got in North Carolina. We've got 7 coal plants. We have to accelerate the transition away from those as quickly as possible. This infrastructure bill that they're debating right now, that's also the climate change bill. You think Republicans are going to come together? You think we're going to get 10 Republican votes on a major climate change bill? No. That's got to happen through this bill. We got to watch that process, because they're deciding what comes and what goes out of that bill right now. One of the percent. North Carolina has something called the Renewable Energy Portfolio System. I know a lot of you just went to sleep on me, but here's the deal. We told Duke, we said, look, if you're going to be the only game in town, then you have to produce a certain percentage of your total electricity from renewable every year, and it's going to go up every single year. That's why North Carolina has had the largest growth in solar of any state in the country except for California, because we have forced Duke to comply with this rule. It worked. But here's the problem. It capped out, coincidentally, this year at 12.5%. Is 12.5% enough? No. No. Virginia just said 100. A lot of other states have said 100. The whole country needs to say 100. That's how we accelerate our transition. I appreciate everybody using better light bulbs, but that ain't exactly how we solve this problem. It's a utility scale problem. You have to address it at the level and scope of utilities themselves. Thank you. That's a great question to lead off with in terms of priorities for our state and our country. Yeah. Okay, give me your first name now. Okay, Dolly is asking about water quality in the Cape Fear River. She said she brought it up with one of our members of Congress in North Carolina a few years ago, wants to know if anything has improved. There have been some improvements in the sense of people have been told who get their water from Cape Fear that they should probably go to Home Depot and buy reverse osmosis devices and attach them under their sink for $300 a pop. Y'all, that's a function of government. You shouldn't be told by your government that there's something in the water and you should self-help your way out of this if you happen to have the funds to do that. There is a plant outside of Fayetteville owned by DuPont, and they made this chemical. It's a family of chemicals known as PFAS, and that stands for something that none of us can pronounce. But it's a chemical that goes in all types of different, Teflon, and all types of different foam sprays, fire retardant foam sprays, and we all have it in our blood. It's called a forever chemical. It doesn't degrade. Does it sound like Obama? We're picking up Obama. I mean, I wouldn't call it an endorsement. But it's not an endorsement. That is remarkable. Okay, I'm going to get to the bottom of that later. Anyway, so we all have some of this chemical in our blood. We're just now deciding, really as a government at the federal level, that we need to regulate, figure out what the maximum allowable safe level is, which we haven't done. You would think that would have already occurred, that they would have made a decision about how much is safe versus unsafe. They haven't even made that decision yet. So our campaign is going to come out with something. It's going to have a list of things that we should do. And by the way, that's not normal. If we just take a step back, from the standpoint of a U.S. Senate race, typically you wouldn't tackle a regional water quality issue. But we're trying to treat this more seriously. And we just have had too many people ask us to make this a priority. So we went to school on this. We talked to some folks at Southern Environmental Law Center, and people have been champions on this, and we're going to put out an agenda. And it might not matter to some folks in the state, but it's going to matter a whole lot to some people. And if I were a U.S. Senator, it would be a priority. You deserve to have clean water. Thanks, Dolly. I appreciate it.
I work for the Catawba County Partnership for Children, and every day we have parents calling in trying to find childcare that they can afford for their families, and it's not available. A bunch of facilities shut down because of the pandemic. We haven't had a bounce back in facilities, so there aren't enough spots, and then even if a spot opens up, if the family can't afford it, we are out of childcare subsidy across the state. What do you see that could be done at the state level or the federal level that could help with this?
Y'all, did we just get a huge lesson from this pandemic in the importance of child care workers, or what? Yes. Didn't they just put our entire economy on their backs and carry it for us? I mean, talk about essential. Essential's not enough. I was in Transylvania County, and as it turns out, Transylvania is a small county, only about 30,000 people. And about 10 years ago, they realized they were small enough that if they made a concerted effort, they could reach every young child who needs to be reached. Transylvania County has world-class early childhood education now. I had no idea. And I tell that story where I go because as a state, we used to have a really proud legacy here. We were the first state in the country that had universal full-day kindergarten. It was in the 1970s. There was a lieutenant governor who you've never heard of who got it done. I like to surface his name because it's sort of been lost to history. His name was Jim Hunt. And then Smart Start, and then pre-K, and then we really haven't done much. And we've allowed a lot of kids to just go unmet. By the way, it's important for kids. Let's talk about the impact on families, particularly working families. What's the average price for preschool in North Carolina? Average price over a year, $9,000. Now, what's tuition and fees at UNC Chapel Hill? $7,000. Costs more for a young family to send 2 kids to preschool than 2 kids to college. So look, there's a lot to do here. We can talk about pre-K, we can talk about Smart Start, but y'all, it's all going to come back to the number of child care workers who we can actually hire. And right now, you make more at Wendy's than you do as a high-quality, highly in-demand child care worker. And we shouldn't have a society where you are incentivized to go across the street to work at Wendy's instead of help with young children. We just shouldn't have our incentives be structured like that. We obviously need to improve funding here. It's not a ton of money to do this thing right. If these kids could advocate for themselves, we would have been doing the platinum edition of early childhood decades ago. But they can't. So we have to do it for them. And when we fail, they don't complain. I filed a bill not too long ago called Go Big for Early Childhood Education. Y'all, this should be a top priority. It's something that we can afford. It's something that both parties have bipartisan agreements on. It's not a purely partisan split. And it's potentially transformative for these kids, for their parents. We got over 50 prisons in North Carolina. Anybody want to see 60? Anybody want to see 70?
No.
This is the intervention point. You know what percentage are juvenile delinquents? You know what percentage of our juvenile delinquents are illiterate? 95. Is that a coincidence? No. 0 to 8 is the literacy bridge, okay? You don't get across by the time you're 8. The odds are you never do. How many of our kids don't get across right now?
Too many.
Half. A little more than half. Do you think we can come to an agreement on this? On the need in an information economy to make sure that all of our citizens are fully literate? You don't do it by putting the on-ramp at the first day of 2nd grade and dumping a bunch of tests on the kids. You do it by backing the on-ramp up. We got thousands of kindergartners starting their first day of school, having never held a book, not knowing any of their letters, any of their colors, not knowing their names. These kids, the vast majority of them, are not going to get across the literacy bridge. Early childhood education, preschool, child care workers. This is how we get at this. In about a week, those of you with young kids who qualify, and that's going to be the vast majority of you, are going to start getting the child tax credit. And I know this hasn't been a headline issue, but it damn well should be. It's going to have an amazing effect on reducing child poverty in North Carolina. And it's because we flipped the Senate and we were able to get this thing passed. Thank you for your question. Thanks for what you do. Anyone else?
After you're elected, what are your preferred committee assignments?
The question is, what would my preferred committee assignments be? Agriculture, still the largest industry in North Carolina. There's going to be a huge intersection between agriculture and climate. We talked about making farmers a big piece of the climate change coalition, right? Veterans Affairs, right? We got 700,000 vets in North Carolina. I would also like to be on the Judiciary Committee. I was on the Judiciary Committee. I am still on the Judiciary Committee in the State Senate. And I've been able to get a lot of work done there. We need a lot of work on our criminal code. We talked a little bit about cannabis a little bit earlier, right? Yeah. Right? Those would be 3. But I'll be honest with you. I appreciate the question. I and we on this campaign are just completely focused on trying to earn your support as much as possible. And I don't spend a whole lot of time measuring the drapes or anything like that, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Right? And there's some thought that needs to be given. Those are really important questions, and it's a question that comes up. But I just want to assure all of you, this campaign is just focused every single day on how can we have a message that you can respect. Because it's so tempting as a candidate at the end of the day to say, all right, we need to speak on this issue, maybe there's a set of talking points that we can import, right, and hit the easy button. As soon as I do that, all of you tune out. The only way I can get your attention, as cynical as everybody is about politics, is just to earn it. And that's really hard. And I want to say, I'm so lucky to have such a great team. They're so young and they have no idea they're not supposed to work this hard. Okay. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Cliff.
So if you get attacked as a Democrat, for defunding the police, what is your answer to that?
The folks who want to defund the police are the Republicans in Congress who voted against the COVID bill that funded the police. The folks who are against the police are the Republicans in Congress who wouldn't even consider the January 6th Commission unconscionable. Now that said, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed on a bipartisan basis in the House, and it's now stuck in the Senate. We should absolutely pass that bill. There are real conversations to be had about police reform. That bill does a number of really good things. You know what else we should do? Representative Katie Porter had a good op-ed about this the other day. She's got a mental health bill. I think it's called the Mental Health Justice Bill of 2021. The idea is we broaden our concept of who our first responders are to include social workers and mental health care workers. Which is good for families who are going through a crisis and want to be able to call some professionals who might not necessarily show up being armed. It's good for police to be able to triage what they've got to do every day. Okay, there are some of these things that are more about mediation than anything else. That's fine, let's respect that. The more comfortable communities feel calling the police, the safer we're all going to be. Thank you for your question, I appreciate you. Okay, rotating through. Yes, ma'am. True. The question was about coal ash, and I came into office 2014, summer up. It was just after the Dan River spill. And so I've learned that was my summer of going to school on coal ash. I had no idea how much we got 100 million tons of coal ash around this state. And there were some people in the legislature who did a really good job. Representative Pricey Harrison comes to mind, of ringing the alarm bell years and years ago, saying, hey, she was filing these bills. We should clean this up. We should clean this up. Those bills all went in the trash can. And no more vivid reminder about the long-term consequences that we all pay when we turn a blind eye to obvious environmental concerns. We're all going to end up paying a lot more than we would have otherwise if we decided ahead of time to take this seriously. Thank you. I appreciate you. Moving right along here. Yes. You're next. You're next. Questions about homelessness. First thing we need to do is talk about Section 8 vouchers. Used to be called Section 8, now called Housing Choice Vouchers for very low-income people. What you need to know is we only fund it to the tune of about 25% the total need. There is a years-long wait list in every major city in the country, including Charlotte, at least 5 years. This administration, one of their proposals that I'm strongly in favor of is to fully fund the housing choice vouchers. Not only was it the biggest thing we could do for homelessness, it would reduce child poverty by about a third right off the bat. And this intersects with substance abuse treatment. You have to I get questions about substance abuse all the time. You've got to make housing one of the first pieces of that conversation. We had a pastor come to one of our events. His whole thing, his ministry, is about substance abuse. He says, Jeff, until you get these people housing secure, you're not going to reach them with any form of treatment. You got to take them out of survival mode. There's no way to do that without housing security. And then we know where they are. Then caseworkers know where they are, and we know how to reach them. That's the first big thing that I would do in that space. There are community grant funds as well, and obviously coming out of the pandemic, there's a visual case to be made in a lot of our cities for why these community grant fundings deserve stronger support. I appreciate your question. Thank you. All right, coming back here. Yes.
How do we make it so that our police departments and even federal departments have the ability to do something about cyber crimes like doxing, swatting, and cyber stalking that basically currently have no enforcement? Can we?
Okay, Kim's question was about cyber crimes. And by the way, this is coming up at more and more of our town halls now. Part of her question is about how criminal law hasn't kept up with the pace of technology, and how we need to make sure that potential victims of people who are being stalked have recourse through the law. And she's absolutely right about that. We've had victims reach out to our office, and we've tried to find ways to update our criminal law in ways that, well, suit the modern environment and make sure that victims have a remedy, a court of law. And then there's a larger conversation to be had about the state of cybersecurity generally. I'll say a couple quick things about that. First, if you have more protection over your own information, you are now more protected against the inevitability of cyber attacks on companies that house your information. So part of this is about passing laws that make sure that you control your own information. We don't really do that in this country very well. We should take a lesson from some of our other states and some other countries that have given citizens more protection over their own information. And here's what else we should do. We should make clear to any country that's considering launching a cyber attack that we consider an attack on our digital infrastructure the same way we would consider an attack on the Port of Wilmington. We should send a clear message. We should send a clear message that if you or some group that you're supporting decides to attack us, get ready. Get ready. There will be a response. And it'll be a response strong enough to deter you and anyone else from ever doing this again. When did we start thinking that we can look the other way when we're attacked like this? I know, it was the last guy. Well, it didn't work. You got to stand up to these people. I think this administration's going to do it. They darn well better. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go here, and then we're going to come back. Yes.
I'm born and raised here in North Carolina, lived the vast majority of my adult life here in North Carolina, and have always felt like that I have already multiple strikes against me. Number one, as a woman, an educator, and a lesbian. I do not feel I've ever had representation that truly has my best interest in mind, and I'm looking forward to voting for you. That being said, I've had a better case than all of our trans brothers and sisters, especially trans people of color.
Yep.
So what are we doing for them?
The question was about trans people of color. I take this question to be about what are we going to do about legislative bullies who like to kick people around, because that's what we've seen in the General Assembly. That's what we saw with HB 2. That was them deciding in a calculated way to give a swift kick to the trans community in an election year because they thought it would be good politics. And we all sort of met as a country and we decided, with regard to our circle of empathy and who's in and who's out, North Carolina made the entire country decide, okay, transgender folks, they in or they out? We decided they're in. And North Carolina or any other state that tries to kick these people around, we're pulling our business. The legacy of HB 2 is civil rights progress for the trans community because they have a level of solidarity that they didn't have before then. But the fights aren't over. They had anti-trans legislation that they introduced just 2 months ago about kids in sports. Remember this? It was the latest outrage of the moment in between Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head. And they wanted to turn teachers into cultural wedge issues. The same way they want to do now with critical race theory. Just another outrage of the moment. So let's talk about this specifically. I think North Carolina would do very well to have a U.S. Senator stand on the floor of the Senate and say, everybody deserves respect Every member of every community, our trans brothers and sisters deserve respect. Can you imagine a U.S. Senator from North Carolina saying that? We've never seen it. I would add my name to the Equality Act, my first day there. Let's get the Equality Act passed. You shouldn't be fired or unhoused because of who you love. We should take a very serious look. The question about homelessness, we should take a very serious look at the connection between LGBTQ homelessness and LGBTQ suicide rates. Both of those rates are off the charts relative to the rest of the population, and you know there's a connection. And again, I credit this administration with having a whole agenda about how to combat LGBTQ homelessness. Part of it is about Section 8 housing, making sure that's more widely available. Part of it's about making sure that foster parents can't discriminate, that foster agencies can't engage in discrimination, making sure that kids have a safe place to live. But mainly, I believe that there's a moral component to political leadership. And I think, I've been in the military for 18 years. I can tell you, the leadership at the top, that personality really does trickle down. And I'm for lots of policies. And we can have a conversation about any number of them. But at the end of the day, what I want you to get from me, just as a person, I can't stand bullies. I can't stand them. If you look at my legislative record, one of the through lines you've seen, I don't miss an opportunity to stand up to these guys when I feel like they're just kicking people around for no good reason. And the trans community absolutely falls into that group. A lot of immigrants fall into that group. And it'll be my job to try and distinguish between the outrage of the moment, the super hot button issue, and let's turn down the temperature. Let's have a conversation about what is actually happening. I want to help us detox from outrage politics. That's what this campaign is about. All right, there was one, and then one over here. Yes.
Sorry, so my question is kind of regarding unemployment on the federal and state levels and how it affects local economies. So Roy Cooper has until September has extended the state unemployment additional. I work in staffing, so I talk to businesses every day, and businesses are struggling so hard to find employees, like new employees to come in. It's a lot because a lot of them are they're not scared to go back to work because of COVID. Like our street of people walking up and down, they don't want to go back to work because they don't want to lose their unemployment benefits, which pays them more than what they get from working. But our economy here in Hickory is not the same as it is in Charlotte or Raleigh. And when the unemployment in the federal level was between $600 bonus, that was people making double than what they usually make in the economy in Hickory. They're not the same as New York City or California. Like, what's your plan of action to hold like these small businesses who can't stay open when they can't find employees to work these jobs in these kind of economies in comparison to like Charlotte or whatever? Crystal.
Okay, Crystal's talking about difficulty in finding staffers and unemployment insurance. And I think we all recognize we were in an emergency situation as a country. And we needed to make sure that people didn't go hungry and that their kids didn't go hungry. And I respect the effort to step up. We were very close in the state legislature to a bipartisan agreement on how to transition. And sort of at the last minute, we thought we were going to have an agreement. And there was a bill going through, and we had a couple of amendments, and they had indicated they were going to accept some amendments. At the last minute, we were on the Senate floor. They said, no, we just want to do this our way. And we said, well, we have a problem with that because I think we're close, but we're not there. Basic issue is we didn't feel it was appropriate to use this legislation to sneak in long-term unrelated changes to the unemployment system. The unemployment system in North Carolina was a disaster for people when the pandemic hit, by design. Right? We knew it was going to happen because it's been deliberately underfunded for a decade, and we didn't feel like doing further damage. What we were trying to do was solve the problem in a way that required a scalpel and not a sledgehammer. And they decided to use a sledgehammer. And then that got vetoed. I'm still optimistic. There's still political will for solving this problem. We're just going to be real careful with how we do it. Part of this issue goes back to child care. You know, we're hearing from a lot of people who would really like to go back, but they can't find child care. And I take those people really seriously. So what we're trying to do is balance a lot of different things. We are certainly hearing from a lot of small businesses. There's no question. And in rural communities, 75% of people work for businesses with fewer than 10 people. This is a big deal everywhere. So you're right. We need to figure out how to solve it. The way that I approach these things is just to look at data and try to take a real data-informed approach. And I'm willing to do that in this case. That's not the best political answer in the world. Doesn't make everybody clap, but that's just that's my honest answer, right? Just to be reasonable and responsible. Well, responsibility does make people clap. It's a low bar to impress people in politics these days. Yes, ma'am?
What is your vision for public transportation in North Carolina?
The question is, what is my vision for public transportation in North Carolina? More of it is my vision. And I really respect the work that I think Pete Buttigieg is doing as Secretary of Transportation. What was his line? It was so good. He's like, we need trains. They don't necessarily have to be Japanese style. I'll settle for Italian style trains or something like that. It was a really good line. Look, the issue here with mass transit is that the reason we haven't seen a lot of it recently is because it's so expensive that your individual county, your municipality doesn't have the tax base to do it on your own. You need a state partner and you need a federal partner to roughly split these projects into thirds. And your state partner went away in 2010. That's why, in Charlotte, we had the light rail project. That was like the last project that got under the wire before the majority switched in 2010. And clearly we haven't had a federal partner because Congress hasn't been able to do anything for about a decade now, right? So that's the hope, is that under this current environment and out of this infrastructure bill, that we're able to bring a federal partner back online. We still don't have a state partner, but hopefully there's enough money coming from the federal government it can sort of make up for that failure. That said, look, y'all, we got to get to the bottom of why these mass transit projects cost so much more in America than they do in other countries. I mean, it is the multiple on the price tag is remarkable. And look, we're talking about your tax dollars, so you want us to be as responsible as possible. And there are just a number of factors that are really driving up costs that make your tax dollars not go nearly as far as they should when we're talking about mass transit. I would want to see real progress on the ability to get cost affordability, real effectiveness with your dollars before I said, okay, here's $1 trillion. Right? We want to make sure that when we lay that money down, it lays as much track as it possibly can. And the disparity in the cost in the United States versus other countries is dramatic. Thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, what do you report on tax reform so that corporations and billionaires and millionaires pay their fair share?
Gene? All right, Gene's question was about corporate taxation. Y'all probably seen some of this in the news lately, right? Here's the situation. I think somewhere around 90 of the Fortune 500 companies paid $0 in federal tax. Why? Because they're in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and some of these other. I looked up the Cayman Islands actually the other day just to see how big it was. I pulled up a Google Earth shot. It's like 5 miles tall and 6 miles wide. It's got a GDP of like $2.5 billion, right? What's ours in North Carolina? Like $500 billion? It's this small little speck. And all of these companies are like, no, we're headquartered there. We swear, right? So look, there needs to be a minimum tax on these companies because we're talking about tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars that corporations are withholding. Does anybody think that it's fair that Amazon pays essentially no tax? No. This is a fairness issue. Yes, we want revenue to make certain investments in infrastructure, but it's a fairness issue first and foremost. Thank you for your question. All right, we're coming up on the hour. I want to take one more question, and then I'll hang out. Happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk. There's always a lot of pressure on the last question. So I want to make sure that y'all feel really confident in this. All right, we're going to do 2 last questions because you looked very confident, ma'am, in the blue shirt, but so did you. So you go right ahead.
I've heard a lot of wonderful ideas and questions, and this is my first time listening to you, and you have a new following. But it's all going to come down to 60 votes. how are we going to stop a minority party from bullying the rest of our country into doing nothing? You just said for the past 10 years. All these ideas won't happen. What is your idea to fix it? Rick.
Rick's talking about the filibuster. He says, nice ideas, Jeff. I don't see you getting to 60 on any of them. Do we think he's right? I think he's probably right. Note the disparity. You got one party that's got an actual platform, wants to pass some things, healthcare, climate change, criminal justice, public education. You got another party, they want to do judges and tax cuts, both of which take 50 votes. The filibuster, the current version of the filibuster, which is 60 votes for everything, is not a hallowed part of American tradition. It's been around for about 15 years. I don't think it's done anything to facilitate compromise. I think it's been about facilitating bad faith, corruption, and obstructionism. And look, I think we're getting some really early evidence. What I told people at the beginning of this campaign is I am filibuster skeptical. And we'll see if Mitch McConnell is going to use the filibuster now the exact same way that he used it the last time he was majority, or rather minority leader, which is just to create gridlock. And so far, that's what we've seen. But I will say, I haven't heard anybody who has a problem with the senator having the ability to take the floor and talk. You got a problem? You got a bill that's funding every single county except Catawba? Then show up and talk till you're blue in the face. But to call from South Dakota and say, shut it all down, that's not compromise. That's not discourse. That's just bad faith obstructionism. I think we're going to have some proposals on how to reform this. I look forward to taking a look at those proposals, and I think you're going to see within the next 2 months. That's just me pulling a number out, but I think our tolerance for this is rapidly shrinking. What I would tell you. The actual last question, yes.
Minimum wage / living wage.
Good one.
Yes.
Okay, those of you who couldn't hear it was, what's our website if you want to get more involved with the campaign? It's jeffjacksonnc.com. No, it was actually the living wage, minimum wage. Hey, y'all, so a third of the state, a third of the workers in our state earn less than $15 an hour. Disproportionately women, disproportionately people of color. Hasn't gone up in over a decade. When we raise it, the most important thing that we should do is make sure that it adjusts for inflation going forward so we don't go a decade in between raising it again. And y'all are going to love this. Y'all know what does adjust for inflation in North Carolina? It's the maximum allowable contribution to a political candidate. That goes up like clockwork. And I think it speaks to our priorities in a way that doesn't reflect well on us. Thank you for that. And now what I'd like to do, there's a member of my staff who I always have, whenever he can join us, I like to have him close us out. Eric, where you at?
Right here.
Wonderful. Y'all give a hand to Eric. Eric is in charge of our field operations, which means he's in charge of the interns. We learned from Georgia the importance of field.
Yes.
We're going to 100 counties in 100 days. By early September, when we're done with that, we will have organizers, volunteers in every single county in the state more than a year before the election. That's how we win. This man's going to be just as responsible for our performance as I am, and I'd love for you to meet him. Eric, take it away.
Well, that's a lot of pressure. Thank you guys so much for coming. My name is Eric. Before this, I was in Georgia as a very, very tiny piece of the movement that got us to take back the Senate so that we could we got to see what it takes to do it, right? A lot of round-the-clock organizing all the time and going to communities that aren't normally heard from, which is what we're doing now. But I haven't asked for you guys. We have volunteer events every week. if you guys would like to be bothered by me often, so that we can continue to reach the people we need to come to these events at the town halls, and then further organizing up until the primary and the general. Please come up and approach me. We have all these new business cards to hand out, and I don't want to take them all back to my lonely apartment. So, so thank you guys so much for coming, and please get involved if you can.